Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot into the sun-baked sands of ancient Egypt. The year is, well, it's somewhere between the time of pyramids and the age of Cleopatra, and the sun? It's doing what it always does, sitting up there like an unblinking god, casting its golden punishment on everyone below. You're standing in the middle of a dusty village near the Nile, and the air is so dry it practically crunches in your lungs. Your feet are already sweating in sandals that feel like they were made from hot toast. Your linen tunic clings to you in all the wrong places. And shade? That's a luxury your hut barely remembers. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're all listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along a narrow dirt path, ducking past reed fences and yawning donkeys. Around you, ancient Egypt pulses in slow motion. Women are hunched by outdoor ovens, their backs glistening in the light. A scribe fans himself lazily with a palm frond, glaring at his inkpot like it's somehow hotter than yesterday. Somewhere, someone's yelling about fish again. It's too hot to care. Here's a strange thing, despite the relentless sun, the people don't seem to panic about it. They live in it, sure, but they also live with it. You're starting to see that the heat isn't just a problem here, it's a fact of life. The kind that gets baked into your habits, your housing, even your jokes. The average summer temperature in ancient Egypt often soared above 100 degrees Fahrenheit 38 degrees Celsius, especially in the southern parts of the country. And let's not forget, no ice cubes, no air conditioning, and absolutely zero excuses to call in too sweaty to work. But people adapted. Not just biologically, although historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians were particularly heat-tolerant over time, but through thousands of tiny, clever strategies. The kind of tricks you don't invent unless you're desperate for comfort, or at least for the illusion of it. Take the streets, for example. They're narrow. On purpose. That's not a design flaw, it's shade strategy. The walls of houses rise high and lean close, keeping long, narrow corridors of shadow all day long. You slip into one now and immediately feel a 5-degree drop. There's even a light breeze tunneling between mud-brick corners. No magic, just clever physics. You step into someone's courtyard, calm down, it's imaginary, and spot a small clay basin filled with water. Next to it is a bundle of wet linen, draped loosely over a jar. Someone's placed a small child beside it, probably to nap. The fabric cools the water through evaporation. The water cools the air. The air cools the baby. It's not exactly a Dyson bladeless fan, but it works. And now here comes a twist. Not everyone hated the sun. In fact, the sun was sacred. Ra, the sun god, ruled the sky, and worshipping him meant facing his fire daily. But spiritual reverence doesn't mean you don't look for shade. Even the priests shaved their heads, not for comfort, but for ritual purity, and as a bonus, it helped with airflow. Every sweaty blessing counts. By the way, your scalp's probably already itching under that borrowed wig. Yes, wigs. Egyptians wore them not for fashion, though they were stylish, but for practical reasons too. They shaved their heads to avoid lice and heat rash, then slapped on wigs when the sun got too spicy. Think of it as ancient Egypt's version of detachable sun hats. Chic and efficient. Now glance up. The sky hasn't moved. Not a cloud in sight. You squint and wonder, did they ever wish for snow? Probably not. They did have poetry, though, written on papyrus and tomb walls, whispering about the seasons and the Nile floods and, occasionally, the sensation of cool shade after a long walk. Even their metaphors needed a drink of water. Here's your first mainstream historical fact to pocket. Ancient Egyptians oriented their homes to reduce direct sunlight and optimize shade. North-facing windows were common. Thick walls of sun-dried mud brick kept interiors surprisingly tolerable. Thermal mass, baby. These homes were often windowless on the sun-exposed side, with cool courtyards acting as natural ventilators. So, the next time you complain about your studio apartment not having cross-ventilation, well, ancient Egyptians were already on it. Now for the quirky tidbit of the night. Some upper-class Egyptians trained monkeys to fan them. Yes, monkeys. It's not clear whether these little assistants were helpful or just adorable chaos gremlins, but tomb art and certain texts hint at their pampered, fan-wielding antics. Imagine a monkey flinging a palm leaf over you while nibbling figs. Relaxing or risky? Scholars still debate it. And speaking of debates, there's an open scholarly question still fluttering about. Were these cooling habits truly widespread, or mostly reserved for the elite? Some argue that poor farmers had far fewer options and simply endured the heat with gritted teeth and frequent swims. Others believe these simple cooling strategies, like architecture, linen, and timing work with the sun, were common knowledge, passed down in households and temple schools alike. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. As always, as you wipe your imaginary brow and settle under the sparse shade of a fig tree, you start to appreciate the rhythm of it all. Ancient Egypt didn't fight the sun. It sidestepped it, outsmarted it, adapted to it with stubborn grace, and more linen than should reasonably exist. And in this world where modern convenience doesn't exist, where every drop of sweat is a problem-solving opportunity, you find yourself oddly soothed. You're still under that fig tree, the branches above trembling slightly in the dry breeze. The air smells faintly of dust and ripe fruit. Somewhere nearby, you hear the slosh of water being poured, slow, deliberate, calming. A woman is wetting the steps of her home, again. Not to clean them, but to cool the air. This, oddly enough, is one of the most effective heat hacks in ancient Egypt: evaporative cooling. You watch as she dips her jug into a clay pot that's been resting in the shade. The water inside is already cooler than the air, thanks to the pot's porous walls and the miracle of physics. She trickles the water down onto her stone threshold, where it begins to evaporate, stealing heat from the surface and leaving a whisper of coolness behind. Her house is made from thick, sun-dried mud brick. Mud brick isn't just dirt with an ego, it's an insulator. Those thick walls absorb heat during the day and slowly release it at night, acting like a thermal sponge. Inside her house, there's hardly a breeze, but the shade alone drops the temperature dramatically. You take a step inside, and it's like walking into a cave that remembers what winter used to feel like. Now, here's your mainstream fact. Ancient Egyptian homes were intentionally sparse and strategically shaded. Most had flat roofs where families would sleep during hot summer nights, and small windows placed high near the ceiling to allow hot air to rise and escape. That's right, your ancestors basically invented passive climate control while wearing open-toed shoes. And speaking of rooftops, go ahead and climb up one. No, not literally, metaphorically. From up here, you see other households doing the same thing. Families laying out reed mats for sleeping, the occasional snore drifting on the breeze. Even now, as the sun dips lower, people prefer to be up here where the air is less stifling. A few are sipping something out of clay cups, beer, maybe, or barley water. Hydration was essential in Egypt, not just for comfort, but for survival. They had dozens of words for different types of water: river water, well water, sacred water, dirty water, even bad water, which was probably a polite term for don't drink this unless you enjoy intestinal regret. Clean water was stored in large ceramic jars, *Zaire pots*, and kept in the shade, sometimes wrapped in wet cloth to aid the cooling effect. Now here comes a quirky tidbit you'll enjoy. Ancient Egyptians brewed a type of sour beer called heket that was often thick, porridge-like, and had a cooling effect when consumed. It wasn't just for fun, it was hydrating, nutritious, and soothing in the heat. Think of it like ancient Gatorade, if Gatorade was chunky and fermented. As you sit up here, dusk settling around you like a cotton shawl, you begin to notice how everything in their lives moved with the sun. Morning was for activity, farming, baking, trading. By midday, the pace slowed dramatically. Shops closed. Work paused. People disappeared into their homes. It wasn't laziness, it was smart scheduling. Even sacred rituals were adjusted to avoid the hottest hours. Worshipping Ra at high noon? That was more symbolic than literal. And here's a scholarly debate worth mulling over. Did Egyptians design their entire society's rhythm around the sun's movements? Some historians argue that their reliance on solar calendars, their spiritual architecture aligned with celestial bodies, and even their burial rituals all indicate a deep, almost scientific respect for heat and light cycles. Others counter that while these elements were certainly present, practical needs, like not passing out from sunstroke, drove more mundane behavior patterns. So, was it reverence or just good sense? Hard to say. Either way, you look out across the rooftops now, and it feels like the city is exhaling. Cats slink out from behind stairwells. Clay pots steam gently where their damp cloths are drying. The smell of baked bread lingers in the air, mixing with something minty, perhaps a household growing mentha in a corner pot, known even then for its cooling properties. And while we're here, yes, they had gardens. Even in the desert. Wealthier families cultivated enclosed garden courtyards with shade trees, water channels, and flowering plants designed not only for beauty but for temperature control. Trees like sycamore and date palms were prized for their dense, generous shade. These gardens weren't just decorative, they were deeply practical, functioning as outdoor cool rooms and social spaces where guests could drink, laugh, and fan themselves without fainting. You lean back against a sloping mud brick wall, and for a moment, everything feels manageable. The dry heat, the rustling trees, the rhythmic slap of sandals below. It's all designed, not by engineers, but by time-tested habit. By trial, error, and generations of sun-weary genius. And you begin to notice the silence. Not total silence, but that soft collective hush of a people who've agreed, we rest now. The Nile glimmers nearby, still as a mirror. A few torches flicker to life, casting long shadows across flat rooftops. You sip the imaginary beer someone hands you. It's thicker than expected, but cold. Surprisingly cold. And that's the trick, really. Ancient Egypt didn't need ice to cool down. They used knowledge. Evaporation, insulation, airflow, rhythm. It was a country that knew how to wait out the heat without fighting it. And maybe there's something to learn from that. About patience, about adaptation, about wearing linen and minding your water jug. Awaiting, continue. The moon hangs high now, brushing soft silver onto the Nile's surface. You're lying flat on that mud brick rooftop, the air finally flirting with the idea of being tolerable. But below you, down in the darkness of the courtyards and quiet alleys, there's a whole other scene unfolding. You see, when the heat chokes the daylight hours, people simply shift their lives to the night. Nighttime in ancient Egypt wasn't just for sleeping. It was for doing things that would have melted you by noon. You hear the gentle tap of sandals on packed earth, the rustle of baskets being moved, low conversations drifting like incense. Merchants setting out goods under flickering oil lamps. Fishermen preparing their nets by moonlight. Even scribes, yes, actual bureaucrats, sometimes did their bookkeeping under the stars when it was just too hot to think straight during the day. You wander down an alley, the walls on either side tall enough to trap shadows but not heat. Still, the difference is noticeable. This is when the world breathes. You pass by a baker's courtyard, where dough sits rising quietly, the yeast doing its job with no sense of urgency. The baker himself is wiping sweat from his forehead with a cloth that's probably seen too many summers. He nods at you as if to say, yes, the oven's on, but at least the sun's off. Here's your historical anchor. Daily life in Egypt was dictated by Marat, the concept of order and balance. That included balancing labor with rest, movement with stillness, sun with shadow. People weren't lazy, they were efficient. Why fight the sun when you can wait for it to leave? And now for the curious detail you didn't know you needed. Ancient Egyptians were big fans of foot baths. But not just for hygiene, they believed soaking your feet before bed cooled the entire body and promoted better sleep. Picture yourself lowering your tired feet into a wide, shallow basin carved from alabaster, filled with water that's been cooling in the courtyard all day. There's even a handful of lotus petals floating on top, because, why not? You've earned that floral luxury. And if you're wondering what people wore during all this moonlit activity, well, not much, honestly. Linen, light as air and loosely wrapped. 4 men, simple kilts or loincloths. For women, sheath dresses with wide shoulder straps. Children often went without clothing entirely, because why bother wrestling a toddler into fabric during a heat wave? That brings us to another form of heat management: letting skin breathe. Without modern modesty standards dictating every hemline, Egyptians had a much more practical relationship with clothing. It wasn't about fashion, it was about surviving the afternoon. You'd see bare torsos, shaved heads, even body oils applied to reflect sunlight or keep the skin hydrated. Ah yes, oils. Let's linger there for a second. Wealthier Egyptians used perfumed oils as part of their cooling ritual. These weren't just status symbols, they were functional. Mixed with ingredients like myrrh, cinnamon, and lotus, these oils helped moisturize the skin, ward off insects, and, most importantly, cool the body through slow evaporation. Some even used conical wax perfumes placed atop the head, designed to melt gently throughout the evening and release fragrance. The ultimate slow-burn self-care. Now, here's something scholars still puzzle over. Did these perfumed wax cones actually melt in the heat, or were they symbolic in nature, worn mainly during religious ceremonies and banquets? Some wall paintings depict them in casual settings, while others show them in obviously staged, formal gatherings. Maybe they were used more for scent than style, or maybe we're just jealous we can't pull that look off today. You reach the edge of the courtyard, where a cat flicks its tail from the top of a storage jar. In the corner, a clay cooler, what modern archaeologists call a Zaire pot fridge, is doing its quiet magic. Two pots, one nested inside the other with damp sand in between, create a gentle cooling system. It's basic thermodynamics wrapped in pottery. Inside, there might be milk, or a cooled melon, or even fish, though you probably wouldn't want to smell that this late at night. All around, you see ways the Egyptians used architecture to cheat the sun. Narrow alleys allowed for cross breezes. Courtyards were designed for airflow. Some temples and larger homes even had wind catchers, openings that funneled air down into interior rooms like ancient ceiling fans. Think of them as desert air conditioners with a flair for drama. It's now well past midnight. The city isn't asleep, exactly, but it's resting. You hear the soft clink of pottery, the occasional laugh, the yawn of a dog. And if you close your eyes, you might feel the faintest breath of air moving across your skin, cooled by the river, channeled by stone walls, blessed by shadow. And it's at this moment, just as you're thinking, maybe I could live like this, that you see an older man step out of his doorway. He's holding a wide-brimmed, woven fan. Not the kind to create wind, but to swat away mosquitoes. Because if there's one constant in all hot-weather civilizations, it's this. Where there's warmth and water, there's always something buzzing. Still, you smile. The fan looks handmade, the palm fibers woven tight, the handle polished smooth from years of use. He sits down on a stone bench, waves at a neighbor, and starts humming a tune older than your dreams. You lean against a wall, your body finally matching the tempo of the night. Let the heat have the daylight. The Egyptians? They claimed the moon. Awaiting, continue. You wake again, not from sleep, but from that half-dreamy state where the air is cool enough that you've finally stopped sweating. A low breeze skips across your face. Somewhere, a donkey brays in protest at nothing in particular. You roll onto your side, and suddenly, you're not on the rooftop anymore. You're inside a grander space now. Stone walls, high ceilings, quiet. Welcome to the home of someone important. Maybe a high-ranking priest, a merchant with connections, or a scribe who's translated enough scrolls to earn some serious perks. And the first thing you notice? How weirdly cool it is in here. You stretch your arms and glance around. Thick stone walls. High, vaulted ceilings. Tiny windows near the top that let in slivers of light, but absolutely no direct sun. The architecture isn't a coincidence, it's a climate strategy. Ancient Egyptians, especially the wealthy, built their homes not just for status, but for survival. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptian homes, especially those above street level or with inner sanctums, were purposefully designed to stay cool using passive airflow. The thick mud brick or stone walls held in cooler night air and blocked daytime heat. The flat roofs, which radiated heat during the day, became breezy retreats at night. And let's not forget the interior courtyards, around which many houses were built. These courtyards weren't just decorative, they served as air wells. By trapping cooler air at the ground level and allowing hot air to rise and escape through high vents or openings, they helped maintain a surprisingly comfortable indoor climate. Now you step deeper into the house, and your feet slide over smoothed limestone floors. There's a subtle dampness, someone has sprinkled water on the ground to cool it down. It's not a huge amount, just enough to create evaporative cooling as the water disappears into the dry air. That's right. Evaporation wasn't just something they understood, it was something they used on purpose. You catch a glimpse of a servant quietly pouring water over a clay floor, her movements slow and rhythmic. She's not cleaning. She's air conditioning. And while you're at it, let's throw in the fringe fact of the night. Some households even hung dampened linens over doorways and windows to further cool incoming breezes. Think of it as a chilled air curtain, minus the humming noise of machinery. Very low-tech. Very effective. Very damp. But here's something even cooler, literally. Large jars called cadet were stored in the corners of rooms. These weren't just for water storage, they acted as heat sinks. Terracotta is porous, so the water inside slowly evaporated through the walls of the jar, creating a little bubble of cooler air around it. Smart, right? And you thought your modern diffuser was clever. Of course, this kind of innovation didn't stop with jars and damp cloths. Wealthier households also employed what we'd now call climate zoning. That's a fancy way of saying, they lived in different rooms at different times of day. During the heat of the afternoon, you'd retreat to an inner chamber, thick walls, high ceilings, little light. At night, you might return to the rooftop or the courtyard for some breeze. And in the winter, the sun-facing walls were suddenly very helpful. It was the original thermostat, just follow the light, or avoid it entirely. Now for the scholarly head-scratcher. Historians still argue whether certain upper-class houses had actual underground cooling systems, like shafts dug into the earth to let in cooler air from beneath. Some believe this was part of temple architecture but not used in residential buildings. Others suggest it's been underdocumented because such systems don't preserve well. So was it real? Or just an overexcited theory? We may never know for sure, but it definitely gives your basement a run for its money. You walk now through a corridor into what seems to be a sitting room. Woven mats cover parts of the floor. Papyrus stools and low benches are arranged neatly. On a small table, there's a bowl of pomegranates, some split open, red seeds glistening like rubies, and a cluster of blue lotus flowers floating in a shallow dish of water. Even fruit and flowers served a cooling function here. Pomegranate juice, for example, was used as a refreshing summer drink. Served cold. Not likely. But even lukewarm, it beat the heat. And now you notice something charmingly practical. Ceiling hangings made of woven reeds. They don't rotate or sway like modern fans, but they absorb heat and reduce glare from above. During midday, they keep the room dim and manageable. A bit like squinting at the sun through a floppy hat. As you settle onto one of the benches, your hand brushes over a painted wall. It's faded now, but you can still make out images of lotuses, boats, and curious gods with animal heads. Maybe Thoth, or Hathor. The wall itself is part of the cooling strategy, painted white or pale blue to reflect light. Dark colors? Forget it. That's a recipe for boiling your guests. And while you're lounging in this cushy little pocket of ancient comfort, you hear a servant approaching with a vessel of water. She pours you a cup, and even though it's warm, it tastes clean and earthy, stored in one of those cool jars. You sip it slowly, each drop a gentle reminder that even in the middle of a desert, with no electricity, no ice cubes, and certainly no AC unit humming in the background, the Egyptians found a way to stay cool. Not flashy, just effective. A cat slinks past your foot. It yawns, curls up in the corner near a shaded window slit, and goes back to sleep. Smart cat. As you slowly open your eyes, the sunlight has shifted. Long shadows now stretch across the tiled courtyard. You wander to the open doorway, and something catches your nose, a faint, fragrant smokiness, like burnt resin or dried herbs. You follow it. through a narrow passageway, past a clay oven, into a more private part of the home. And there, wafting through a reed window, you discover one of ancient Egypt's most curious solutions to the heat: scent as climate control. Yes, you heard that right. The Egyptians didn't just try to cool the air, they tried to make the heat more bearable, pleasant, even. And they did this with one of their favorite tools: perfume. You step into a room where several cone-shaped items rest on small trays. These are unguent cones, solid perfumes made from fats, oils, and crushed aromatics. Women, and sometimes men, wore them on their shaved heads during festivals or meals. But, in the privacy of the home, they were gently heated to release fragrance into the air. Some historians believe people placed them near windows so the breeze could spread their scent. Others argue they were reserved for special events. What's not debated is this: ancient Egyptians were obsessed with smelling good. And they had good reason. Bad smells, in their worldview, weren't just unpleasant, they were unholy. Foul air was linked to disease and spiritual impurity. So, a fragrant space wasn't just for comfort. It was a kind of purification ritual. You weren't just cooling off, you were aligning yourself with the gods. The room you're in now has a small burner in the corner, a clay pot smoldering gently with kifi, a sacred blend of honey, wine, myrrh, frankincense, and about a dozen other ingredients. It's not overpowering, just enough to add depth to the air. You breathe in. There's something calming about it, like warm spices on a winter night, but here, in the heat, it feels strangely crisp. Now for your mainstream fact: kifi wasn't just perfume. It was also used as incense for temples, and some versions were even consumed as medicine. Yep, ancient NyQuil. You can imagine how a cooling scent, combined with subtle ingredients like juniper and cinnamon, might trick the body into feeling refreshed. Today, we'd call it aromatherapy. Back then, it was divine science. And now, a little-known quirk: some homes burned resins not just for scent, but to repel flies and mosquitoes. A kind of ancient bug spray, but one that smelled better than anything you've ever sprayed from a can. Modern reconstructions of homes have suggested that placing smoldering incense near doorways had a dual purpose: spiritual protection and pest deterrence. Clever, right? You wander out again, past the reed screen now dripping with water, back into the courtyard. A breeze stirs. The smoke from the burner swirls through the air, dancing its way into the shaded dome of the sitting room. You follow it, and in this cooler interior, you spot another oddity: painted walls with delicate blue lotus blossoms, white ducks, green papyrus reeds. It's not just decorative. This, believe it or not, is psychological cooling. Here's where things get interesting. Historians still argue whether Egyptian color schemes were meant to reflect real environments or suggest idealized ones. But one thing's certain: blues, greens, and cool-toned motifs dominate the inner sanctums of elite homes. And the reason might be surprisingly modern. Think of it like this: have you ever painted a room blue to feel calmer? Ancient Egyptians might have pioneered that trick. You pause before a mural of the Nile, its waters a serene band of indigo. The artist has included ducks splashing, fish jumping, date palms swaying in the breeze. You know it's not actually cooler in here. But your mind doesn't seem to care. You feel cooler anyway. One theory says these murals acted like mental mirages, helping people imagine relief from the sweltering sun. Another suggests they were meant to summon spiritual protection through images of fertility and water. Either way, you feel it working. Even the very idea of water seems to drop the temperature a few degrees. A child wanders in and pours cool water from a painted jar. The ceramic is a soft gray, painted with lotus flowers and ducks. You sip. The water's been drawn from the pot nestled in damp sand, cooled without ice or electricity. It tastes faintly of earth and minerals, refreshing in a way your filtered kitchen tap could never manage. And speaking of the mind's power over the body, let's talk fashion. Outside, another servant fans herself with a palm frond, her linen dress nearly translucent in the light. Egyptian linen wasn't just a fashion statement, it was engineered for heat. Loosely woven, often bleached white, it reflected sunlight while allowing airflow. Even wigs, worn in public or during rituals, were often replaced with shaved heads at home, a biological fan, if you will. And yet, you notice something else. Jewelry, gold, turquoise, lapis. It sparkles, even in shadow. Were these cool to the touch? Did they radiate the sun's heat away from the body? Probably not. But the psychology of beauty and ritual mattered. If you felt composed, scented, adorned, you felt powerful. And power, oddly enough, is a kind of insulation. Back in the perfume room, the kiffy is nearly gone. The coals are dull and soft. The air is still warm, but bearable. There's a certain pride in enduring this climate with grace. After all, this isn't just survival. This is style, ceremony, and subtle genius, all at once. You rest a hand on the wall again. Still cool. Still whispering secrets of sand and water, smoke and scent. You step away from the garden, letting the soft rustle of lotus leaves fade behind you. The heat presses gently against your skin again, like a thick silk shawl, warm, but not yet smothering. It's the kind of heat that makes you crave shade, cold drinks, and a breeze. Thankfully, the ancient Egyptians had yet another way to keep themselves cool, especially at night. Clever use of elevation and rooftop breezes. Picture this: flat-topped houses made from sun-baked mud brick, clustered together in dense neighborhoods. Now climb up a narrow stairwell, barely wide enough for your shoulders, and step onto the roof. The air up here feels instantly different. It's drier, cleaner, and more mobile. You turn slowly in place, scanning the skyline. Other rooftops shimmer in the distance like sand-colored stepping stones. The occasional rooftop goose honks disapprovingly at your presence. Yes, rooftop livestock was totally a thing. This is where the magic happened after dark. The upper stories and rooftops weren't just storage areas. They were living spaces. Rooftops were the ancient Egyptian version of a summer porch, a place to escape the oven-like interiors of mud brick homes after sunset. You might find someone cooking over a small clay brazier, telling stories beneath the stars, or unrolling sleeping mats in the open air. Here's your historical fact. Sleeping on rooftops was common practice in much of the ancient world, but especially in Egypt, where nighttime temperatures in summer could remain high and air circulation indoors was poor. Egyptian homes often lacked upper-floor windows, relying on stair-accessible terraces to allow heat to escape upward and residents to catch a breeze. And here comes the quirky tidbit: some rooftops even featured tiny wind catchers. These weren't elaborate towers like the Persian badgers, but simple, slatted structures that caught prevailing winds and funneled them downward into the living space. Kind of like a reverse chimney, but for air. People would sleep directly beneath these little contraptions, wrapped in light linen, with their hair ruffled softly by the desert breeze. You walk across the roof now, bare feet pressing gently into woven reed mats. In the corner, there's a ceramic water jar. You tip it, splash a bit on the floor, and lie down next to the damp spot. As the water evaporates, it pulls the heat away from the clay, and from you. It's primitive evaporative cooling, the same principle behind today's swamp coolers. Historians still argue whether this method was widespread or just a luxurious improvisation among the upper class. But the logic checks out. And hey, it feels good. A family gathers on the neighboring rooftop. They're sharing cool slices of melon, maybe one of the prized desert varieties that store water like secrets. One of the children swings a palm frond fan lazily, not to cool herself, but to keep the flies away. You watch the mother wring a cloth soaked in scented water, and drape it over her shoulders. Someone chuckles. Someone else plays a soft tune on a flute. There's something tender about the way rooftops brought people together. Without digital distractions, without the need to check in or record the moment, the act of lying side by side under the Milky Way became both social and sacred. You realize now, this wasn't just a trick to beat the heat. It was a lifestyle. You glance east, toward the vast desert beyond the city's edge. The moon is beginning to rise, fat and pale. On a clear night like this, even the outline of the pyramids might catch the silver light. It's easy to forget that while modern Egypt bustles with air-conditioned cafes and neon-lit highways, the bones of this older world are still here. The rooftop breeze, the clay jars, the woven mats, all quietly doing their jobs in the background. Another detail catches your eye, a small brazier glowing low in a corner. It's not being used for cooking, but for scent. A chunk of incense, a mix of myrrh, frankincense, and probably some desert herbs, is slowly releasing aromatic smoke into the sky. Not just to smell good, but to discourage mosquitoes and biting bugs. You take a deep breath. It's sweet, resinous, a little spicy. Combined with the cooler rooftop air, it creates an oddly luxurious ambience, like the ancient version of a rooftop bar, just with more goats. You lie down for a moment, the breeze combing through your hair. Above, the stars shine with an intensity you don't get in modern city skies. One glints particularly bright, perhaps Sirius, the dog star, which was sacred to the Egyptians. Its rising in the sky signaled the coming flood of the Nile. Imagine, a star telling you when to harvest, when to pray, when to prepare. Up here, without walls, the heavens feel a little closer. The sky is no longer just scenery. It's a calendar, a companion, and, when paired with a rooftop nap, a rather excellent ceiling fan. You smile. Who needs air conditioning when the universe is this breezy? Still, not every rooftop experience was pure bliss. During sandstorms, families would roll down reed screens to keep grit out of their noses and teeth. During festival nights, you might find neighbors hollering to each other across the rooftops, forming a kind of vertical social network. Ancient Egypt's version of group chat, but with more shouting and fewer emojis. The air smells of dust, incense, and clay. Somewhere nearby, a flute starts up again, this time with a tune that's slower, perhaps a lullaby. A sleepy hush spreads across the rooftops, like a whisper made of wind. As you close your eyes, wrapped in linen, cooled by elevation and clever architecture, it occurs to you. This civilization didn't just survive the heat. It lived with it, danced with it, slept under it, letting the night sky and rooftop air become allies in a shared battle against the relentless sun. You roll onto your side. Tomorrow, you'll explore what they wore to stay cool, but for now, the rooftop is yours. The rooftop breeze still lingers softly as you open your eyes, stretching gently and brushing away a stray bit of dust from your linen robe. You've just tasted the ancient night air, and now it's time to turn your attention to another essential tool in the ancient Egyptian quest for coolness: their clothing. Imagine yourself stepping back down into the sun-baked streets, the ground radiating heat through your sandals. The midday sun isn't yet at its peak, but you can already feel its fiery fingers reaching into every corner of the city. Your linen tunic clings lightly to your skin, a simple but purposeful garment designed to keep you from overheating. This wasn't just fashion, it was ancient Egyptian air conditioning. The Egyptians preferred linen for a very good reason. Made from flax fibers, linen is light, breathable, and durable. It's the kind of fabric that lets air flow freely, whisking sweat away before it becomes uncomfortable. Unlike today's synthetic blends, it almost feels like you're wearing a gentle breeze rather than fabric. In fact, the quality of your linen was a clear indicator of your social status. The finer the weave, the cooler and more prestigious you were considered. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Linen production was a significant craft in ancient Egypt, with entire workshops devoted to spinning, weaving, and bleaching flax fibers. The bleaching process involved exposing linen to the sun, which not only whitened the fabric but also softened it, an early form of textile conditioning. But here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some ancient Egyptians apparently took their linen coolness to the next level by soaking their garments in water before wearing them on scorching days. The damp fabric would evaporate slowly, cooling the skin underneath, much like a modern wet shirt on a hot day. It sounds uncomfortable to us now, but remember, they were pros at beating the heat. And speaking of pros, historians still argue whether this wet linen method was widespread or a luxury only accessible to the elite. It's also debated if it was common for everyday workers or reserved for the priests and nobility who could afford to constantly refresh their wardrobes. Your linen tunic isn't the only garment designed for summer comfort. Imagine the classic shendit, a wraparound skirt made from pleated linen that flares just enough to allow airflow. This simple piece of clothing was practical, allowing you to sit, walk, or work with ease, while staying cool. In contrast, the rich might sport longer robes, sometimes with decorative fringes that shimmered in the sunlight, adding a hint of ceremony to even the hottest days. These robes weren't always worn tightly. Loose, flowing clothing was favored precisely because it kept the body cooler. You might wonder what Egyptians did about headwear. It's not just a fashion statement, it was also protection against the brutal sun. Imagine yourself donning a broad-brimmed woven straw hat or a linen headcloth called a nemes, worn by pharaohs, that draped gently over the shoulders. The hat shields your face and neck, while the nemes's folds help wick sweat away, letting it evaporate rather than pool. Now, for the quirkier side of ancient Egyptian cooling fashion, some workers and farmers are believed to have painted themselves with mixtures containing mud or even crocodile dung, not just to shield their skin from the sun but possibly to aid in cooling. Yes, crocodile dung, a rather startling but apparently effective sunscreen and insect repellent. Historians still argue the extent of this practice, and whether it was widespread or localized, but it certainly adds a peculiar splash of color to the cooling narrative. As you imagine walking through a busy market, you notice that clothing also helped with airflow by layering light fabrics or adding sheer linen veils that could flutter in the breeze. Women might wear more elaborate dresses, often sleeveless or with thin straps, to allow maximum air circulation. There's also a social cooling dynamic at play. Wearing lighter and looser clothing wasn't just practical, it was a marker of leisure and status. Those who worked outdoors in the blazing sun were often seen in minimal clothing, sometimes just a loincloth, while the wealthy used their wardrobes to demonstrate both power and comfort. You step past a group of artisans working on a sculpture. Their arms are bare, sweat beading on their brows, but their linen loincloths and loose sleeves helping to keep them functional through the heat. One artist pauses and fans himself with a palm leaf, chuckling as he jokes about inventing air conditioning centuries before electricity. You chuckle too, imagining the irony. It's clear, ancient Egyptians took their clothing and their cooling strategies seriously. The light linens, the head coverings, the occasional wet fabric trick, and the emphasis on airflow all come together in a holistic approach to beating the desert heat. As you walk, you reflect on how much thought went into these simple garments, how fabric and function met in a way that seems almost modern despite the millennia. It's a testament to human ingenuity, and to the endless human desire to find comfort, even in the harshest environments. So next time you reach for your t-shirt on a hot day, spare a thought for the ancient Egyptians, who mastered the art of wearing the breeze. The gentle warmth of the day continues to spread as you wander further into the heart of the city, your linen-clad skin basking in the soft sunlight. You pause briefly, watching a group of children play beside a shaded courtyard where water trickles from a small stone fountain. The cool splash of water is a welcome relief, and it reminds you that the Egyptians weren't just relying on fabric and breezes to stay comfortable. They had another ace up their sleeve: water itself. In your quest to understand how ancient Egyptians kept cool, it's impossible to overlook the ingenious role of water. They didn't have electric air conditioners, but they did have something almost as soothing: evaporative cooling. Picture yourself standing near the Nile on a hot afternoon. The water's surface shimmers in the sunlight, and the gentle breeze carries a hint of moisture and the scent of river plants. This natural humidity wasn't just a backdrop, it was a cooling resource that Egyptians cleverly incorporated into their daily lives. One mainstream historical fact to note is that the ancient Egyptians designed many of their homes and public spaces with water features like pools, canals, and fountains. These were not mere decorations but functional elements intended to cool the surrounding air. As water evaporated, it absorbed heat, lowering the temperature in the immediate vicinity. You might imagine a courtyard with shallow pools where women might wash or rinse clothes, while nearby, slender stone columns provided shade and helped funnel the breeze over the water's surface. These mini oases in the urban heat offered much-needed respite from the relentless sun. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some wealthy households reportedly used porous clay water jars called zayers, which kept drinking water surprisingly cool through a natural evaporative process. You might picture someone sipping chilled water from a ceramic vessel, the cool liquid a small luxury amid the desert heat. Historians still argue whether this technique was widespread or mostly confined to the elite, but either way, it's a fascinating example of early cooling technology. In addition to courtyards and water jars, the Egyptians practiced a form of natural air conditioning by strategically placing their homes near canals or the Nile itself. The proximity to water meant that cooler, moister air was more accessible, especially during the hottest parts of the day. Urban planners of the time may not have had modern tools, but their intuition about microclimates was impressive. You start to imagine the gentle sound of water, dripping, flowing, splashing, and how that sound, coupled with cooler air, must have made a busy marketplace or bustling home feel more bearable. Water was more than survival. It was a sensory bomb. And there's also the possibility that some buildings featured wind catchers, architectural elements designed to trap and direct breezes into shaded interiors, often over pools or fountains to maximize cooling effects. These structures, common in later Middle Eastern architecture, have sparked debate about whether the ancient Egyptians used similar techniques. Some scholars suggest that certain temple designs hint at early forms of passive cooling, but evidence is inconclusive. Interestingly, water also played a social role in cooling rituals. Imagine the relaxing moment when a servant gently sprinkled water on the hands or feet of a guest, a sign of hospitality and a practical way to cool down. These gestures underscored the importance of water not just for survival but for comfort and social grace. As you picture this, you realize that the Egyptians' relationship with water was multi-layered, a source of life, a cooling agent, a social lubricant, and even a symbol of luxury. Their water management systems, irrigation, canals, wells, were marvels of engineering, ensuring that even in the hottest times, they had access to this precious resource. Yet, despite these clever methods, historians still argue how widespread water-based cooling was among the general populace. Did common folk enjoy the benefits of courtyard pools and evaporative cooling, or were these luxuries reserved for the elite? The archaeological record offers tantalizing clues but no definitive answers. Walking away from the pool, you feel the cooling presence of water still lingering in the air, a reminder that comfort isn't just about what you wear or where you sit, it's also about the environment you shape around yourself. So, as the sun arcs higher, remember that the ancient Egyptians didn't just survive their heat, they found ways to invite the coolness of water into their lives, creating moments of calm amid the desert blaze. As you step away from the soothing splash of the courtyard fountains, the heat begins to press more insistently against your skin. But you're not yet finished exploring the subtle arts of ancient Egyptian coolness. It's time to consider the built environment, the architecture that shaped life and comfort in the sun-drenched land along the Nile. You find yourself wandering down a narrow street lined with mud brick houses, their walls thick and sun-baked, casting deep, welcoming shadows. These homes, seemingly simple to the casual observer, were crafted with an intimate understanding of how to keep the inside cooler than the blazing outdoors. Here's a straightforward fact. Ancient Egyptians built their houses from sun-dried mud bricks, a material that is surprisingly effective at thermal regulation. The thick walls absorb the heat during the day, preventing it from quickly penetrating indoors, and then release it slowly after sunset, helping the house stay cool and comfortable. It's an ancient version of thermal mass, still used in modern eco-friendly buildings. But there's a little twist to this story. Some wealthier homes and temples featured courtyards designed not just for light and air but specifically to create a natural ventilation system. These open spaces allowed hot air to escape upward while drawing cooler air in from shaded areas. It's a clever use of physics without electricity or fans, a quiet dance of air currents. You can almost feel the cool breeze slipping through lattice windows carved from stone or wood. These mashrabiyah screens weren't unique to Egypt but were widely used throughout the region to provide shade, privacy, and airflow. They cast dappled light on the interior, softening the harsh sunlight and cooling the rooms beneath. Here's a quirky detail. Some homes reportedly had rooftop gardens or terraces where families would retreat in the evenings. Covered with vines and leafy plants, these spaces cooled the air naturally. Imagine stepping onto a terrace under a pergola draped with grapevines, the scent of ripe fruit mixing with the evening air, a perfect natural refuge. Historians still argue about how widespread rooftop gardening was and whether it was a luxury of the upper classes or a common practice among ordinary Egyptians. The evidence is fragmentary, but the idea fits perfectly with the broader picture of thoughtful design aimed at comfort. You notice the way streets are often narrow and winding, a layout that some scholars believe was intentional to provide shade and funnel breezes through the city, creating a sort of natural air conditioning at the neighborhood level. It's easy to imagine yourself strolling through these alleys in the cooler early morning or late afternoon, the heat softened by the architecture itself. Your gaze drifts upwards to the famous Egyptian columns, those elegant pillars carved like lotus stalks or papyrus reeds. Some suggest these columns helped channel breezes through temple halls, creating a refreshing airflow for priests and worshippers. The thought of cool air flowing through sacred spaces is soothing, though historians still debate how intentional and effective this was in practice. You catch a faint scent of incense in the air, a reminder that smells also played a role in making spaces feel fresher and cooler. While incense didn't lower temperatures, the fragrant smoke distracted from less pleasant odors that might have been heightened by heat. And speaking of the senses, imagine the contrast between the sun-soaked exterior and the cool, dim interior of a temple or home. The sudden shift from bright light to shadowed calm was probably a key part of how Egyptians found relief. The thick walls, shaded windows, and careful orientation of buildings created these pockets of respite. The houses' flat roofs also served a practical purpose beyond cooling. They were social spaces where people slept during hot summer nights, taking advantage of the cooler air above the city's hustle. You can picture families settling out under a blanket of stars, the city sounds softened by distance and the gentle night breeze. Walking past a small workshop, you glimpse a craftsman fanning himself with a broad palm leaf. This simple tool, repeated in scenes across time and place, remains one of humanity's most enduring cooling devices, a reminder that sometimes the simplest solutions are the best. In the end, the ancient Egyptians' architectural choices reveal a sophisticated, multisensory approach to comfort. Their homes and public buildings were designed to coexist with the harsh desert environment, turning it from foe to ally. So, as you imagine yourself slipping into a shaded room behind those thick mud brick walls, remember how the ancient Egyptians' mastery of their built environment helped them live comfortably, no matter how hot the sun might blaze. Stepping out from the cool shadows of the mud brick homes, you find yourself drawn toward the bustling marketplace, where the hum of daily life mingles with the smells of fresh herbs, baked bread, and spices. It's another kind of comfort, one that comes from routine and small, soothing rituals, especially around food and drink. And believe it or not, the way ancient Egyptians ate and drank played a surprisingly important role in helping them manage the relentless heat. You might not have guessed it, but food and drink weren't just about nourishment, they were also part of how Egyptians stayed cool and refreshed during the long, hot days. A mainstream fact to note, Egyptians favored cool, easily digestible meals, often centered on bread, lentils, vegetables, and fish from the Nile. These foods required minimal cooking, meaning less heat in the kitchen and more time to enjoy the meal. And then there's the fascinating world of Egyptian beverages. Beer and wine were staples, but you probably wouldn't want to rely on them for hydration alone. Instead, they had a special thirst quencher called beer bread, a sort of thick, porridge-like concoction made from fermented grains and water. Imagine spooning this mildly fizzy, slightly sour food that not only filled the stomach but helped keep the body hydrated. Here's a quirky tidbit. Egyptians also drank a sort of cooling herbal infusion, made from mint and other local plants, sometimes sweetened with date syrup. These early iced teas, though served at room temperature or slightly chilled, were designed to soothe the throat and calm the body after exposure to the harsh sun. It's a little-known fact that the medicinal use of these herbs doubled as refreshment. Historians still argue whether these drinks were common among everyday folk or mostly enjoyed by wealthier Egyptians with access to cultivated gardens. Regardless, it's clear that hydration was taken seriously, especially since the desert sun could quickly sap one's energy. In fact, water itself was always consumed carefully. Egyptians believed in balancing hot and cold elements in the body, a concept similar to later humoral medicine. Drinking water straight from the Nile wasn't always ideal, so they often filtered it through sand or charcoal, an early form of purification. Imagine the gentle murmur of water flowing through a clay filter as it dripped cool and clear into waiting vessels. Food preparation spaces were also thoughtfully designed to reduce heat. Open-air kitchens or shaded areas minimized cooking near living quarters, helping keep homes cooler. And in some households, meals were taken in shaded courtyards or on rooftops, where a light breeze could carry away cooking odors and warm air. You can almost smell the fragrance of freshly baked bread cooling in the shade, the gentle clinking of clay pots, and the rustle of papyrus mats laid out for a midday feast. These sensory details bring the scene to life, reminding you that comfort is as much about atmosphere as it is about temperature. Another small but intriguing practice was the use of cooling compresses, cloths soaked in cool water and applied to the forehead or neck to stave off heat exhaustion. While there's little direct evidence, some tomb paintings and texts hint at such remedies being part of daily life, suggesting a hands-on approach to heat management. And let's not forget the role of shade. Market stalls were often covered with woven mats or palm fronds, creating shaded spots for vendors and buyers alike. The weaving patterns allowed just enough light and air to pass through, making the stalls both bright and breathable. You can picture the dappled sunlight flickering across colorful baskets of figs and pomegranates, a welcome patchwork of coolness amid the warm streets. As you wander through this lively scene, it's clear that the ancient Egyptians wove cooling strategies seamlessly into their routines, from what they ate and drank to how and where they prepared and consumed their meals. Historians still argue about how sophisticated these culinary cooling practices really were, but the evidence points to a culture deeply attuned to comfort amid heat, using every available means to stay refreshed. So, the next time you sip a cool herbal tea or enjoy a light meal on a warm day, think of those ancient marketplace moments where simple food and drink became small acts of relief and relaxation in the Egyptian sun. You leave the marketplace behind and wander toward the quieter edges of town, where the homes become sparser and the desert begins to reclaim its territory. But the ingenuity of the Egyptians doesn't stop at architecture and food, it extends to their clothing, which played a surprisingly important role in keeping cool under the blazing sun. The first thing you notice is the simple elegance of their garments. Egyptians didn't pile on layers or heavy fabrics. Instead, they favored light, breathable linen woven from flax plants grown along the Nile. Linen, it turns out, is a natural marvel when it comes to heat. It allows air to circulate close to the skin while wicking away moisture, making it a perfect fabric for hot climates. You probably know that white was the dominant color of ancient Egyptian clothing, and there's a good reason for that. White reflects sunlight rather than absorbing it, helping to keep the wearer cooler. Imagine yourself wrapped in a softly glowing white robe that feels like a cool breeze on your skin. But here's a quirky detail that might surprise you. Some Egyptians went further by wearing slightly sheer or even transparent linen. This allowed even more airflow, though it also meant a delicate balance between modesty and comfort. The rich might have worn more elaborate versions with pleats or embroidery, while commoners kept things simpler but just as functional. You might be amused to learn that Egyptians also accessorized with wide-brimmed hats and sometimes carried large fans, usually made from palm fronds or feathers. These fans weren't just decorative, they were practical tools to create personal breezes. Imagine a servant gently fanning a noble during a warm afternoon, the soft rustle of feathers blending with the distant calls of market sellers. Historians still argue about how widely used these fans were among different social classes, but there's no doubt they were symbols of status and comfort. Another fascinating aspect is how Egyptians treated their skin to stay cool. You might recall that in earlier sections, we mentioned crocodile dung as an ingredient in sunscreen, a quirky, and frankly, eyebrow-raising fact. But beyond that, Egyptians used fragrant oils and lotions not just for scent, but to protect their skin from the drying effects of the sun and heat. Imagine the sensation of a cool, fragrant oil absorbing into your skin after a hot day, a soothing ritual, no doubt. There's also evidence suggesting that some Egyptians applied a kind of powder made from crushed minerals to their bodies, helping reduce sweating and keep skin dry. This may seem odd today, but it was part of their broader approach to balancing the body's natural responses to heat. You might wonder about the role of jewelry in all this. After all, heavy metals might trap heat. But Egyptians favored light materials like gold and faience, a glazed ceramic, which wouldn't have weighed down the wearer or added to discomfort. Plus, jewelry often served symbolic or protective purposes, so fashion and function were intertwined. The way Egyptians combined clothing, accessories, and skin treatments shows a thoughtful, multi-layered approach to comfort, one that addressed both physical and social needs. It wasn't just about keeping cool, it was about presenting oneself with grace and dignity in the heat. Historians still debate how practical some of these fashion choices were versus how much they were about status and ritual, but the evidence points to a culture deeply aware of how clothing can help or hinder comfort. So, as you imagine yourself donning a crisp linen garment, feeling the soft breeze against your skin and the gentle rustle of fabric, remember that ancient Egyptian fashion was as much a tool for surviving the heat as it was a statement of style. Leaving the fashion of the day behind, you find yourself near the Nile once again, where the water's gentle flow offers a soothing contrast to the desert heat. Here, water isn't just a source of life, it's a natural air conditioner and a centerpiece of daily cooling routines. Ancient Egyptians understood the cooling power of water better than you might expect. Aside from drinking it, they used it in various creative ways to beat the heat. One straightforward fact: water from the Nile was often poured over the floors of courtyards and even inside homes to cool the air as it evaporated. You can almost feel the damp, cool earth beneath your feet, offering relief from the scorching sun. But the methods didn't stop there. Some wealthier households had indoor pools or basins, not just for bathing but for cooling the air nearby. The evaporative effect of water, combined with strategic placement near windows and open doorways, created a natural breeze, an ancient version of the swamp cooler. A quirky tidbit to savor: Egyptians sometimes placed wet reeds or mats over windows. When a breeze passed through these damp materials, it cooled dramatically, creating a refreshing airflow inside. Imagine the slight creaking sound of these mats as they swayed gently in the wind, softening the harsh sunlight while moistening the air. The use of water for cooling was so integral that it influenced architectural design. Courtyards often featured central water features, small ponds or fountains, that not only served aesthetic purposes but also helped moderate temperature. You can picture children playing near these cool spots, their laughter mixing with the sound of trickling water. Historians still debate how common these water features were in the homes of ordinary Egyptians versus the elite. While grand palaces had elaborate gardens with pools and canals, the average citizen's access to such luxuries was likely more modest. Yet, even simple water jars placed strategically could help cool a room. Another fascinating aspect of water-based cooling involved fabrics. Egyptians sometimes soaked cloth in water and hung it over windows or draped it around living spaces. As the water evaporated, the air cooled noticeably. This method was a clever, low-tech air conditioner long before electricity. You might chuckle at the thought of Egyptians improvising what we now call DIY swamp coolers, with whatever materials were at hand. It's a timeless human habit, to tinker and find comfort, no matter the century. Finally, bathing itself was a cooling ritual. Unlike modern showers, Egyptian baths were leisurely affairs involving multiple steps: rinsing, oiling, and anointing, meant to refresh the body and calm the mind. Bathing near the Nile, or in private tubs filled with cool water, was a moment of escape from the heat and dust. Historians still argue about how frequently average Egyptians bathed, with some suggesting ritual purity was as important as physical cooling. Either way, water remained central to comfort and cleanliness. So, as you imagine water trickling over warm stone floors and cool breezes carrying the scent of wet reeds, remember that water was one of ancient Egypt's simplest and most effective tools for staying cool under the relentless sun. As the day winds down in your mind's eye, the sun lowers gently toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the golden sands and the serene Nile. The ancient Egyptians, like you, looked forward to the cooler hours of evening, when the heat softened and a different set of customs came into play to help them relax and sleep comfortably. One key fact: evenings were often spent outdoors, under the stars or in open-air courtyards where the night breeze could work its gentle magic. Imagine yourself reclining on a low wooden couch, draped in a soft linen shawl, listening to the distant calls of night birds and the rustle of palm leaves swaying softly in the wind. The ancient Egyptians had clever ways to create comfort in these cooler hours. They made use of open windows and doors to capture any passing breeze. Some homes were designed with tall, narrow windows and ventilated roofs that encouraged air circulation. This early form of passive cooling was remarkably effective and shows their deep understanding of their environment. A quirky detail to note: Egyptians sometimes hung scented herbs like lavender or frankincense near their sleeping areas. Not only did these add a calming fragrance to the night air, but they may have helped keep insects away. Picture the gentle aroma drifting through the cool night, a natural lullaby for weary bodies. Historians still argue about how common the use of such scents was among different social classes or in various regions of Egypt. But the idea of combining sensory comfort with cooling techniques is a lovely reminder of their holistic approach to daily life. As the evening deepened, families might share simple meals of cool fruits, bread, and beer, a refreshing conclusion to the day's work and heat. Drinking beer, which was mildly fermented and quite nutritious, was also a way to hydrate and relax, though it probably wouldn't replace your modern evening tea. Sleep itself was considered sacred, a time to rejuvenate both body and spirit. Egyptians often slept on simple wooden beds with woven reed mats or linen sheets. You can almost feel the gentle creak of the bed frame as you settle in, the cool night air brushing against your skin. Remember how we talked about the practical and symbolic use of fans? At night, fans made from feathers or palm leaves were sometimes used to keep air moving, chasing away the stillness and helping one drift off more comfortably. And so, as you lie back and close your eyes, you join a long line of souls who, across millennia, have sought relief from heat and comfort in the same gentle ways, through soft linen, cool water, whispering breezes, and the calming sense of the night. It's a quiet end to a day shaped by ingenious solutions, humble habits, and a deep connection to the rhythms of nature. Now, as your thoughts grow softer and slower, let yourself sink into that timeless night, cool and peaceful. Wind down. The desert sky deepens into a velvety blue, stars blinking softly as the world around you hushes. The gentle rustle of palms, the faint trickle of water, and the delicate scent of herbs settle into your senses, drawing your thoughts toward calmness and rest. You can feel the cool linen brushing softly over your skin, a tender reminder of the ancient ways that helped soothe the heat and bring peace. Breath by breath, your body begins to relax, the day's warmth fading into a distant memory. Imagine the Nile's slow, steady pulse carrying away worries and restlessness. The cool night air wraps you gently, a quiet invitation to drift deeper into calm. With each moment, the sounds become softer, the world quieter, until only a soft, rhythmic whisper remains, the timeless rhythm of comfort, care, and coolness. You are part of a vast, peaceful story, unfolding slowly, endlessly, beneath the stars. Sleep now takes you gently in its arms. Let the stillness grow, the coolness linger, and the dreams come softly, as if whispered by the winds that once cooled an ancient civilization. Good night.